Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So happy to be part of this session today on building governance models with data visualization. So just to set some context on the topic, and then I have a panel which has got wide experience in different industries. Maybe we'll talk about it in a little more detail. I think governance, as we all know, is very important and critical for any organization, and as CFOs and as finance function, in some form, by default, it falls on the finance organization to be driving governance, right? So whether it's necessarily to be that or not, but I think that's what happens most of the time. So therefore, this finance organization or the CFOs are required to facilitate and enable this. And I think what better way to do that than having some powerful data visualizations tools to help you do that. I think with technology improving and with companies being able to adopt the latest tools available, I think data visualizations really makes the whole exercise far, far simpler and easier. Having said that, I think equally important, particularly for larger organizations, how do you look at your data? What is the quality of the data which is which is being used for such data visualization techniques? What kind of governance you're putting within that itself, so that you have the right kind of data which you're using for the different dashboards and other stuff which you're using to take actions on. So I think that's another important requirement. And if I were to look at it in terms of how companies approach particularly governance and data visualization, I think one could be the very straightforward saying that I'll use governance for all my regulatory related requirements, right? So how do you use a combination of data and different techniques to just manage my regulatory requirements? Or it could be around value creation, saying that, okay, there are a certain set of business priorities that I have, and I want to drive actions around it, and therefore I will build solutions around those to help drive value for the business. Or it could be certain top things you have identified as an organization. It could be some business priorities, it could be some areas of focus that you have identified as part of your business planning process. So there could be data visualizations around it. Or it could be a combination of all of these where you say that, okay, I'll do a mix of governance, I'll look of value creation and top business priorities. So I think all of these exist. So therefore, these are different options available for companies. So what we will talk today is, with the panelists, I think we have Kamini, Mukesh and Neelesh representing different companies. And so we'll try and get a different industries perspective and their own experience in the past with other companies they work for. So maybe I'll start off the first question. So maybe Neelesh, I'll start with you. So given your experience of what approaches taken by company in terms of governance, what do you think has worked well with this approach, and also what kind of data visualization tools have really seemed to have better impact for companies?
Yeah, so interesting question, and I think I'll just probably start with a statement that we've always heard. A picture is equivalent to 1,000 words, isn't it? And I think when I think data visualization, I would start there. I think what Twitter has done is that it just made us think life in 140 characters. Okay, so if you send a page note to somebody today, the span of attention is just gone down. Okay, and therefore what we need to be able to do is really get our messages across quickly to our leadership team so that we're able to get efficient at making decisions. That is effectively one of the key roles that we as a finance function do. I think there are three aspects to how it effectively works. There is the core aspect about information. There is the aspect about then analyzing that information. And then I think there is a third aspect which, honestly, as a finance professional, I have been poor at, and it has taken a lot of learning, which is about how do you communicate it. Okay, and I think more often than not, as finance professional, we spend a lot of energy on getting the information first. I think technology helped us crack the information puzzle. Then we are now focusing on energy on getting the analysis right. Okay, but I think the next level of elevation which finance professionals needs to get to is how do we get our message across far more succinctly so that we can go and create impact. And that is really where I think data visualization has worked well for me in the past. I think two trends we have all lived with. There is a period of time when the whole world is chasing growth, and then there's a period of time when the whole world is chasing cash. 6 months back, we were all thinking the world is a great place to be in, and we were chasing growth. Unfortunately, today we are sitting and chasing cash. Okay, and I think whichever is the priority that we are looking at, okay, I think you can actually have, I have been able to use visualization tools far more impactfully. Sales could be, the standard way of sort of cutting information by what are the channels, what are the categories, but far more important could be, can you really bring in your internal and external data together? So what's happening with your competition? How is the market growing? And can I really bring together the internal knowledge with the external knowledge? And I think that's really where, again, visualization and bringing the data analysis works powerfully for you. The same thing applies to the world as we sit today on the cash side, no dissimilar. Okay. So in my mind, whichever is the priority that you're chasing, I think if you think through this, getting across messages by using great visualization technique is able to get to making decisions far better, far smoother.
Thanks, Neelesh. I think great points in terms of using visualizations and picking those things what are important for your company, and how do you communicate that well enough to the key decision makers. So maybe I'll move to Mukesh. I think your company is in the business of providing outcome-based marketing solutions, and therefore the use of data and data visualization is even more powerful in your case, I would imagine. So maybe your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think we've had good successes and failures, and learned a lot through failures more than the successes. Having said that, I think the key thing is getting the right ambassadors in place, making sure that we have alignment in the organization, right? If you don't aligned across the company, it's almost impossible to get anything done. One of the key learnings is make sure that you start small, have a proof of concept, make sure that that is successful, and post that, that can be expanded to a bigger, part of the organization. So if I can take an example, a lot of our pricing is done for longer term contracts, and typically when we respond to an RFP, we will have assumptions built around what's the right revenue mix, what's the cost structure, what's the profitability, etc. And over time, as we start to deliver, one key thing is what was sold, what is versus what is delivered, and being able to look at data across the pricing systems, across billing systems, across your complete P&L, merging those and saying that okay, your projection was this percentage of revenue, whereas you're at this number. Same with profitability as well. You were expecting this much, and now that's where you are. It does bring out uncomfortable truths at times, but that at least gets the company aligned to what's the outcome. Do you need to look at your pricing model? Were the assumptions wrong? Do you need to look at your sales commissions? Are they done correctly? Do you need to change whether it has to be based on revenue or profitability or collections for that matter? So once people started seeing the outcomes, that's when a lot of buy-in came in and helped us make sure that we push it forward. So yeah, we're learning through it. We have used multiple tools, but I wouldn't call them out. But overall, as long as you're able to, as Neelesh said, a lot of people are visual learners, right? I think around 2/3 of people are visual learners. So ability to show that and bring out insights which are otherwise may not be easily identifiable would definitely help the organization.
Thanks, Mukesh. I think over to you, Kamini. I think you work for Wipro, and you do that for, I'm sure you're doing this for many of your companies, so you'll have great insights in terms of what you have seen work well for companies and how it has helped them in their governance and data visualization journeys.
So thanks, Venki. See, one of the things I want to call out is, as finance professionals, I think we've done data reporting out in various formats, right? Starting off our careers, it would have been typically starting with your bar charts, pie charts, all of those things, right? I think over a period of time, and that's been some of our learnings as organizations grow up, one thing we have realized is that data are very good in silos because they're all controlled by individual users and they ensure the quality of the data. But when you actually want to elevate it to a larger organization and you link across functions, I think that's when it starts getting a lot more difficult, because you'll find you don't have a standard master data maintenance You know, people find that the customer databases are different from what their pricing systems are to what their P&L management is to some extent. So I think in a lot of my organizations that I worked with, I think one of the first things that we had to do is to understand what do we want to drive, how do we create the entire infrastructure, and who are the end users and the stakeholders. I think that's the most important thing to define. The second thing that I think we realize is the fact that data quality, right? Because the way you look at data, it's not that everybody should look at data at the same manner. I think that becomes a very important aspect of it. The third thing I think is about lead indicators and lag indicators, because businesses don't want static data. They want data which is actionable. And how can I bring in different parameters from different parts of the organization? And one of the things that we realized the benefit of is that to bring the stakeholders, get the buy-in very early in the program, because otherwise, you know, you'll spend a lot of time cleaning up the data, massaging the data, getting it to a point, making sure that everybody does that, right? So I think that has been a lot of our learnings along the way, and we're still learning. I mean, as an organization, I think we've not reached that stage, but there is immense opportunity. Tools, I think it depends on the organization and the size and scale you are, but I think there are a lot of free tools too, even large powered databases, and I think depending on where you are in your organization, you can actually choose in terms of doing it. So those were some of my comments on this.
Thanks, Kamini. I think you kind of covered the next question I had in terms of what are the kind of challenges which companies to be watchful for. So Mukesh, do you want to kind of talk about what kind of challenges which you think people should be watchful of, given your experience in the Epsilon context or any of your past experiences?
Yeah, sure. So I think one which Kamini mentioned is about, silos. There's a lot of inertia, right? People have got used to their systems, larger companies and older companies have had multiple systems. So for them to let go of their data, to ultimately put data into a data lake or a data warehouse is tough. Trying to break the silos, making sure that the data is available and available for everybody, it's not just for your own department, and how that data can be connected is something really important, So that's what I would say as the challenges.
Yeah, so Neelesh would like to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are potentially two levels of challenges in my mind. One is, as Kamini and Mukesh spoke about, there is a basic level of quality of information and consistency of information. I think honestly, as finance professional, there is another level which sort of takes a lot of midnight oil to be burnt and takes a lot of effort, isn't it? Typically, every couple of years, the business has a rethink, and if you're lucky, every couple of years. Sometimes even more frequently, correct? Suddenly you want to redefine your markets, you want to redefine your customers, and then it is about going and restating all the past, okay? And I know how many nights I have burnt, okay, just sort of trying to make sense of restating information. And therefore I think it literally comes down to the sanctity of information and what you want to do with the information as a way to two ways of thinking about it. And the only solve to that is how much flexible can you keep your database, okay? Can you literally attribute as many characteristics that you can attribute to every data point so that you have the flexibility as business evolves, as management thinking evolves, that you're able to reorganize your information. And it's not just from that point of view, silos, how do you break silos? If you're able to bring together two unrelated information or which the organization thinks is unrelated, but if you're able to bring that information together meaningfully, sometimes you come with an aha moment, which usually doesn't happen in the business. And therefore, there is one thing about the whole sanctity, but my other sort of point of view would be also think through what are you going to do with the information, because your ability to capture it right at the first instance, okay, can't be replicated. Don't waste that moment. Get that right, and you can do far more with the information.
Yeah, thanks, Neelesh. I think it's interesting. I was reading some report which says that in most organizations, about 10 to 20% of the data is the most critical data. A lot of other data is all associated information which you need and which is really relevant. But if you're able to get that 10 to 20% critical data managed well, it's flexible, as Neelesh was mentioning, that you're able to use it in different forms. And I think nowadays there are a lot of tools, technologies available where it's not just one database which you need to rely on to extract information. I think you can fetch information from multiple sources of data to make meaningful sense. So I think that's something which we need to be think about.
One more point
Sure.
that I wanted to talk about challenges, which I think is very important for finance people, is data security, right? Because we are talking about access of data across the organization. I think it's also very important, and that's we are learning also that, is that you can't keep data accessible to everybody. I think what is very important is you create personas for what they should get access to. Because there is a lot of competitive intelligence which is there with your organization when it comes to pricing, when it comes to customer base and profitability and all of those things. I think that's some aspect of it that I think we need to be careful about, because sometimes in our rush, to make sure data is available across the organization for quick business decision, I think we miss this element to it. And this can become actually quite expensive in the long run.
Absolutely. I think the kind of regulation we are seeing in GDPR and other stuff in Europe or other geographies, even in India, I think the data privacy bill is still in the works. So I'm sure, I think that's a very relevant point you brought out, Kamini. So maybe just switching tracks into a little more focus on governance itself, Neelesh. I think, so where is governance most important? So what domains and part of the domain does the organization need it the most? How do you see it? I think you are in a business where you are in digital brands and you're acquiring a lot of brands yourself. And I'm sure that governance is something is a challenge that you always have. So how do you see this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there is the business context to governance. I think there is also an ownership context to governance. I think it becomes all the more challenging in a startup where your board is your investors. Okay, and therefore governance is usually about the shareholders, and shareholders are usually distant from the business, isn't it? But in case of a startup, your board is usually your investors, okay, and your founder is a demigod, okay? That's the startup ecosystem in India, isn't it? And therefore, I think the whole aspect of governance in a startup and the whole aspect of parentage in context of governance is very different. The other interesting part from a startup point of view is you're always selling, not just your product, but your business. Okay, we all sell our products, but in a startup, you're always also selling your business because you constantly need money. And therefore, the line between future and today becomes very blurred. Okay, and that's the cusp of governance, isn't it? Because you always want to overpitch, okay, because you need to get money, okay, but there is a reality that is a reality. Okay, and that then becomes a very thin line of governance because you have a set of investors who anyway are your board. They also are interested in getting new money into the business. And therefore, to some extent, they subscribe your overpitching, okay? But they also want to know the real performance because they also want to hold the demigod accountable, okay? That is the landscape, okay? And I think, unfortunately, the finance profession sits at the heart of battling this landscape, okay? Amrut Manthan ho jata hai, okay, is what happens to us, okay? So there is no win here, guys, okay? I think you have to be agile is the only thing which you have to be very clear about, because getting your business not sold, but getting your business rightly pitched, rightly marketed is also an important part of what finance is about, isn't it? We also need to see what can be the future in categories, in business circumstances which have not been ventured in the past, and therefore how can we create value, and we are part of that, and therefore we have to contribute to that, as much as we also have to still ensure that there is accountability across the organization, and that will always be a very, very tight rope to walk. Yeah, that's effectively the landscape. And therefore, the point around governance in my mind is not just about what are the aspects, but I think it's also about what is your parentage, what is the context in which you're working, and then you have to really figure out which are the ones that you want to emphasize and focus on. And honestly, you can't win all battles, and which are the ones that you sort of let go. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I think great points, particularly from a startup perspective, because I think the challenges and the dynamics in a startup are vastly different from, let's say, an organization which is established and been around for a long time. So maybe we'll go down one level lower from a high-level board or governance at that level to in terms of how do you do it? I think, Mukesh, maybe I'll come to you to say that how do you see this happening in terms of iterative versus, let's say, a big bang approach? Because I think a lot of us, Bangalore being a software hub, there's always this whole thing of saying a big, large project and you do a whole thing and then out of that there's an outcome versus looking at iteratively saying that what can we do? So what is your views and how do you see this?
Yeah, so I think based on what I have seen, I think a big bang approach is usually tough to implement because that would require alignment with all your functions and all your business leads. And with everybody having their own priorities in place, this may not be a thing which can really work for them. So at least based on my experience, going small, as I was saying earlier, having a proof of concept, make it successful, show the outcomes, and then finally the results follow. So try and first look at, specialist consultants who can help, get you the results quickly, and then over time, then build your own teams who can help you, take it to the next level.
Thanks, Mukesh. I think great inputs in terms of looking to pick up smaller projects so that you have some quick wins, because I think given the nature of this topic both ways, be it governance or the tools you're looking to use, unless the business or the management or the leadership team sees benefits out of whatever you're looking to do, it's going to be always a challenge picking up much larger programs. So I think picking smaller projects, quick wins, are always a good thing to do. So maybe moving on in terms of the consequences, right, of consequences of not getting it right, and therefore what is the opportunity cost of not leveraging data and therefore improving governance? Maybe Kamini, will come to you, and how do you see that?
I think it's very difficult to quantify the opportunity loss, right? But I think one thing is very clear, that without insights, it's very difficult to run business today. And from my perspective, from whatever we've seen, I think business leaders at whichever level they are in the organization are increasingly asking for actionable information. They say, don't give me a report at the end of the month that tells me what I've done. Tell me right now, what have I done? How am I doing? What do I need to do to meet our numbers, right? To get over there. And just don't tell me here's the problem. Tell me where are my potential solutions. So in my view, Venki, I think very difficult to quantify the loss associated to it, but I think no organization can be left behind in this journey, depending upon their level of investment, but they have to invest time in these areas. I think that will just help them, whether it is the priority of growth or it's a priority of cash that Neelesh spoke about. I think depending on that, you will have to invest time on that whole piece.
Sure, thanks. So Mukesh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think as per something I was reading, it said that if you're able to optically, show some data, it reduces meeting time by about 24%. And I've dealt with a lot of business leaders who are experts in their field, but when I try and show them financial numbers, they get lost. And if I can save my time and their time by representing things in a much easier format, it definitely helps. So if I'm able to save so much of time to work on my business priority, that's much better than trying to explain just the data per se. So for me, that's one. Secondly, I think if I take my company's example, right, we have a messaging platform which looks at when we send out messages to our customers, when do they open it, and through which platform do they open it, what's the time window, etc. And we show all of that data to our customers, and then based on that we can then help them identify their strategy as to what has to be done as far as their communication strategy is concerned. So as long as and if you're not able to do that, the ability to explain that in a much simplistic format is much difficult. Communication just becomes easier, and ultimately it helps us drive more business outcomes for them.
Sure. Thanks, Mukesh. So Neelesh, your thoughts?
So, yeah, we can paint all dire consequences, isn't it? There are so many organizations which haven't seen data points. Nokia, okay? I'm just giving a very different context to data. Okay, it's not just your internal data. Okay, Nokia just missed the complete trend on how mobile will evolve. Okay, and therefore, literally understanding every aspect of your business and therefore what's relevant to you and sort of reflecting on it is extremely important. The dire consequences could be a complete blow-off of your business. Hopefully it doesn't happen every day. What happens every day is that then there become multiple versions of facts, okay, because data becomes everybody's shelter. And therefore, I grew 30% versus I grew minus 30%, both the numbers suddenly become right in the organization. Okay, and I think those are the daily consequences that as a finance professional we end up dealing with, because decisions then get made by personalities, okay, who can shout louder, okay, who is able to manage the boss better, okay, becomes a driver of making decisions. Okay, and that's really, I think, the poor consequences on a day-to-day basis, that really there is no basis to decisions in the organization.
Sure. So I think point well made in terms of consequences, Neelesh. So maybe just to focus on who's leading the governance efforts, right? I spoke about saying that largely, many times I see that it is finance function which kind of bears a cross of leading governance in some form. But I just wanted to hear from Kamini, what's her view, and what do you think can be done to get a lot more attention at the CXO levels or at the board level around governance? Do you see anything else we need to do differently to improve or focus around governance?
So Vicky, from I'll just probably share, see, Wipro as an organization, we just went through a large transformation program currently, right? And one of the decisions that we made primarily were two things. One is we said that, this will stay with the office of the CFO in terms of defining the strategy and working closely with the business stakeholders, right? So definitely from an office standpoint, that's where we decided to reside it. But from a governance standpoint, or elevating the conversation, we really got our CXOs in place. Because I think for a large transformation program, that's why I'd say it depends on the kind of transformation program you want to take. Unless you have the C-suite really invested into it, I think the organization may not move, especially when there are large organizations. But it depends on where your organization is, because I'm saying that if your organization is where you're trying out something as a proof of concept, you want to create it up to a stage like Mukesh spoke about, then it might make sense to create a model that you can go back to the organization and then you can get more buy-in to that extent, right? But we've kind of taken the approach of really looking at a big bang approach to some extent, because the scale of change that we needed to do to get to a large program, transformational program, could not have been done in pockets. I mean, we all had to run together to that extent. So I think that's been our experience.
Right, thanks. So maybe I thought maybe we could cover some questions around some good examples we have seen in our context in terms of data visualization programs or projects we have taken and the kind of benefits. So any good examples you want to share, Neelesh?
Yeah, not necessarily getting into tools. There are many of them, and really don't want to specifically speak about a tool. But I'm happy to narrate actually a real life example or what I lived through. Way back, I was working with Unilever, and I was at our head office in London, and I had a very young boss, the CFO of Unilever, extremely impatient person and phenomenally intelligent. For more than 4 words, he didn't have patience to listen to it, correct? And the way to get messages across to him, I realized, was actually not to do tables. Okay, it's not the way he receives information. Okay, and what actually always worked with him was charts, and what always worked with him was you can't have 2 messages on one slide with him. Okay, you need to have just one message on one slide. Okay, because that's the way he internalizes his information. So for me, the example, more than the example, again I'll come back to saying when we put across information, it's extremely also important to understand who's the receiver of that information and what their style is. There are people who want to stylistically start with knowing the assumptions before knowing the outcomes. Okay, and there are people who say, give me the headlines first and then take me to page 5 afterwards, correct? And therefore I think when you speak visualization, when you speak about communication of information, the most important aspect of anybody who's communicating is to know who the receiver is and what the receiver style. And if you get that right, usually your ability to get your messages across just go far better. Yeah, so that would be an experience that I would share here.
Sure. I think great point, Neelesh, in terms of understanding your audience and therefore tailoring your communication and what you're presenting directed to their style and their needs. Maybe some discussion we could have around what are the kind of developments or changes in trends we are seeing in this space? Anything we see which is changing, evolving, and how do you see that?
Yeah, I was in fact, one of the advantages of coming to panels like this is that you also try to learn a lot about what's happening, in the outside world as far as a lot of these is concerned. And one of the Gartner reports that I read, I'm sharing what I learned over there, and definitely it resonated a lot with me. I think one is this art of data storytelling, I think is really becoming a big trend for finance professionals, because I think a lot of times what people do is finance just gives me the data, but they don't give me any insights in terms of what needs to be done, right? So I think this clearly is predicted to be as one of the key trends, and that will, I think, differentiate or distinguish finance professionals. The second thing, of course, I think is the availability of tools. I won't get too much onto it, because I think we have a lot more tools that are available in the organization, and depending on the level of depth that we need to do. The third thing I think which I would talk about is, cloud. I think with availability of cloud and availability of really storing data at central places, I think today our own ability to share information across the organization, other than your classical case of maybe sending it through emails or storing it in a shared drive, I think it's made the offering a lot more easier and a lot more for all of us to work, right? So I think these were a couple of trends that I noticed in this area and kind of resonated to me because, you know, I always worked for my bosses. In fact, one of my existing boss says, Kamini, tell me the headline news. You know, we can go to all the information that you want, similar to what Neelesh said, right? He said, I'll get lost in your data. I'm a businessman. I need to make a decision. Tell me the headline news. What do I need to do? And then we will get to how do I need to do it, right? So I think this is probably what is expected out of a lot of us in terms of driving decisions.
No, I think the
Just to the point that Kamini you're making, Apple had this tagline, you know, there's an app for everything. Okay, I think the world is now moved to there is a tool for everything. Okay, I think there are just so many tools. You want to solve your travel problem, you have a tool for that. You want to solve your supplier problem, you have a tool for that. So I think that's the other trend which is emerging. So you need not necessarily go and have one ERP system, okay, which you're going to do end-to-end in your organization, and then figure out that it's very manufacturing-based. I'm a service organization, and my needs are different. And therefore, I think one big trend is like there's an app for everything. There's a tool for everything.
Interesting you mentioned Apple, I just remembered. I think when Steve Jobs used to make product presentations, I apparently had a rule. The slide will have just one point. It will not have anything else. So he'll use that to build whatever he had to say rather than have a clutter of information around it. So I think for us as finance professionals, we love to put a lot of data on the PPT and load it with as much as we can rather than trying to pick what is most critical. But I think equally, one thing, although we're not necessarily speaking tools by itself, I think one thing I would want to highlight is, I think with the newer technologies, earlier you had to kind of get multiple databases together to get some meaningful insights. And that too, with an organization where you have different functions, you may have access to some data, you may not have access to some data, but if you get all of them together and use a cross-functional set of data to make meaningful sense of information, used to be a much bigger challenge in the past, but I think now there are enough tools available where it can sit in those respective databases, but you can fetch all of them and still make insights available. So I think there are now enough platforms who are doing it as a solution, and even now they're moved to low code as well, saying that, okay, you don't have to be a data scientist to be able to build your AI model. So not necessarily getting into specifics of tools itself, but I think this technology which is making it available where you can use disparate set of data, not necessarily sitting in a data lake, but maybe coming together for insights as well. So I think, any thoughts, Mukesh, you wanted to speak about in terms of trends which you're seeing?
I think the big thing, as all of us know, is a lot of data. So too much of data and how that gets analyzed is extremely difficult. So being able to cull out is something which will be a challenge, and integrating that with multiple systems, right? You're getting data through an internal, multiple sources. They may not be aligned. So as an example, your billing system may have a customer ID, your timesheet may have a customer ID, and those two may be different. And the same way you're getting, as Neelesh was mentioning, data from external sources as well. So how do you make sure that your data is able to give you the right insights is going to be a trouble with the amount of volume of data which is coming through right now.
Thanks, Kamini, Mukesh, and Neelesh. So I think maybe we have some time for questions, and if you have any questions from the audience, we're happy to take them.
If you could raise your hand once again, I missed that, yeah.
Myself, Sudarshan from Blend. So a couple of questions as you guys, Neelesh is buying multiple companies, and similarly, Kamini is managing multiple countries, right? In terms of multiple entities and multiple countries, how the governance will take care, and how do you manage to be on top of that, whether the governance is happening in each and every country or in each and every entity?
I have a advantage and a disadvantage. Okay, my advantage is that it's an open canvas. Okay, I potentially just contrasting with Kamini, and I don't know what she's going to say, but she has a legacy, and she is going to be sort of bounded by legacy. In my case, there is no legacy, and therefore that's my one advantage. I can today sit and define how my information should be laid out, what governance I need around it, etc. So that's my advantage. My disadvantage is there's nothing existing. Okay, and therefore we're literally asking basic questions like one entity versus other entity, is there a consistent revenue recognition policies or not to that extent? Okay, so therefore it's a mixed bag, quite honestly, today. I think again, couple of things that are sort of principles for us, which is what we're trying to work towards is we're putting ourselves 3-4 years down the line. Okay, we are an organization which is in existence for a year today, and we are visualizing, let us say, 4-5 years down the line, if we are going to be potentially a publicly listed company, then what is it that people would want and expect from us? And that is then becoming, so to say, our starting point of building what we are building backwards. So to make a live example of this, because it might sound very simple and the normal thing that you would do, but I would visualize a scenario where when we are publicly listed, one of the questions on our information would be, what part of your growth is organic and what part of your growth is happening because of new acquisitions? And then that could go down to what is the EPS impact of your new acquisitions. Okay, and therefore, as we design our information system today, okay, we are putting ourselves into that place of 4 years down the line, I will have to potentially respond to a question which is about what is the dilution or accretion impact of new acquisition or on your EPS, and therefore you start thinking through some of those problems and start figuring out, do you need to solve for them today? Are you going to solve for them tomorrow? And if you're going to solve for them today, how should you organize yourself? So just making it a more realistic example to you, and therefore sometimes it's not just about who you're going to talking to, but potentially in future what is going to be your conversation, which is also going to be an important factor in defining what you're looking for. Yeah, I just hope you get a sense of it. It's far more painful, but I'm just trying to give you one example of what we are living through. Yeah.
So like Neelesh says, yeah, I have a legacy and we have a baseline to some extent, right, on this. So at least as far as different countries that we work on, like for example, I work in Americas, so I have Brazil, I have the Latin American countries which are part of my portfolio. What we've really tried to do as we get new and new acquisitions is to bring them to the Wipro standard as we do it and try to bring it. It's not something that happens overnight with new acquisitions that come in place, but we typically put in a roadmap for about 12 to 18 months, but we try to bring them to our standard because that's the only way we can manage very large organizations, right? I don't have the flexibility to create design. To some extent, we relook at what is available and we build on that. So we put a lot of our analytics on a base set of standard information and then use that to drive business insights. So that's how we work. So your platforms underneath or infrastructure could be a little different, but we try to get them to a common standard and work through it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi. Absolutely, very nice discussion. I'm Shuman from GSK. My question is more towards the data security, especially with the emerging, in fact, largely emerged risk of phishing. And when after doing simulation, after doing awareness drive, still the click ratio stays more than 60% in an organization. How do you think we can deal it in a different way? I mean, people just click. The email arrives and people click. And that's I'm not expecting there is a ready solution for that, but would like to hear your view and probably deliberate more.
I've seen, you're right. I think the fact that phishing attacks continue, and I think particularly I'm sure many finance folks here would have seen that there are targeted attacks even within the finance function, right? You'll have an email which is coming which will appear like your CEO's email ID, and they'll say you need to make a transfer, there's an urgent acquisition or whatever. So I'm sure all of us have dealt with some such form of phishing as well. But I think to the larger point, I think there are always attackers who are smarter and will continue to keep sending messages which are attractive enough for people to click. But what I've seen work well, at least in organizations, is not only drive awareness around it, but what companies have also done, and I've seen that even in my current organization being done, is there are simulated phishing attacks which the IT team sends out. And they keep doing that, and then they publish data to say that how many of those simulated phishing attacks were clicked by people, and then send out data to say that, okay, this is the number of ones we sent, these are the people who clicked, and these are people who compromised, and these are people who just went to that site and didn't do what is required. So I think it is continuously doing that. There's no one silver bullet solution to this, unfortunately. And of course, your technology systems and the security solutions you build will continue to evolve and help you do that. But there are always going to be some attackers who are going to be smarter. But I think as long as you show people the mirror saying that these are the number of people you did and this is what you did which could have compromised the organization's security, I think the awareness will only continue to evolve.
And with that insight, you do targeted intervention of training targeted
Absolutely.
audience.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate.
Hi, this is Shilpa. I'm the head of FPN at 𝗪𝗧𝗛. A lot of insights that I could resonate with because we are in the process of implementing some such dashboards which we hope will get used more than data and Excel charts. It should be something online that the teams should be able to use. One challenge I have seen is, initially there is a lot of buzz and a lot of interest from the audience to see and look at the dashboards and the insights. And over the period it dies down. So have you tackled something like this? Some insights from you all will be really nice to hear.
And clearly, as long as your data continues to be robust and is giving out actionable insights, it should help you. If your data is not really helping you get to actionable outcomes, then you may struggle. But you can obviously expand your visualization to other parts of the business which is currently not being covered. I know it's not easy. It takes time to integrate it and get the dashboards out. But as long as you're giving out the right data and expanding your scope of what you're covering, that will help you cover a bigger part of the organization to help you, with the business outcomes.
Just two practical things that we did, right? At times because a lot of this is evolving. One thing we did is we stopped sending the report for a couple of days, right? And you really get a quick sense whether anybody's looking at it. And there are reports that died a natural death because it just didn't serve the purpose that it was intended to do. So, we saved ourselves some effort in that whole process by doing it. The other thing that we did a little more proactively is to speak to the stakeholders, right? We had, the initial instances, not only in the initial stage, because that's where you invest a lot of time, but at points of time, we did go back and talk to the stakeholders to say that, is this getting you what you want, or is there something more we can do? So the point, I think, which Mukesh also made, I think this is an evolving journey. It's not something that you'll be able to do. And the same thing that was relevant today may not be relevant tomorrow. So I think it will be a continuous journey in terms of moving forward with this.
Thank you.
Just one last point there. I think also equally to keep that buzz going, right? To not to let the initial enthusiasm settle down, is all senior reviews typically, if they're used with these kind of dashboards for reviews, then the interest will remain because then they're going to know that the CEO or the CXO is going to ask a question related to the data which you're publishing in your dashboard.
Yeah.
Then it kind of puts pressure on the people who are coming for these meetings to also be looking at those.
Also looking at that, yeah. I think it's a change in the sense that, the audience also has to move out of Excels, right? I think as we go into that automation journey, I guess our audience also has to step up to start looking more online rather than Excels. I think that's very insightful. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hello, hi. I'm Sukirti, Head of Finance from Alpha Design Technologies. Very good insights we have been received from last couple of 20 minutes of the session on the corporate governance requirements and other issues we have discussed. In the scenario right now where the CFOs are considered as a strategic part of the strategic business decisions more than the support functions, which was earlier scenario. And also in a scenario where CFOs mostly given the role of compliances and statutory norms, mainly corporate governance. It's not just the CFOs or the team can do most of the things to comply it, right? There will be various support teams which will be required beyond the finance teams, wherein the support will be required from them to make them understand and also get the support for the compliance. In the scenario with the developing organizations, the most of the support other than finance teams will not be aware of the importance of the compliance and corporate governance. It's tough to make them understand the importance of it. So in this scenario, how we will try to educate them on the need and mandatory compliance of that?
This is my sort of second innings with a startup, and therefore I can relate to what you're saying. Typically under-resourced, typically 10 things to be done, and usually something is always breaking down, correct? So I fully relate to the points that you're making. There is of course the standard thing of get people aware, have the tone from the top, so will your CEO speak about it? And can you send, mailers every day to remind people? Can there be a printout on the desk which speaks about things? All of that is good thing to do. But I think somewhere you have to then go and pinch people, okay, because after a point in time, education and tone from the top may not always work, okay, and therefore I think somewhere you have to pinch people. So one of the things that we did in my earlier organization is we did implement a compliance tool, okay, we would extract information from it, and we then made it a pattern to sort of go and publicize it widely in the organization. We also carved out within that, because there are, I mean, India is a crazy country, we have too many compliances, correct? So what we also had to then do is to figure out where is it, how do we get it to become more hard hitting, and therefore we created a column in the sort of information dashboard to say this compliances could have got somebody in the organization jailed, okay? It just becomes very hard hitting, okay, that the CFO could have got jailed or the CEO would have got jailed if this compliance was missed. So yes, do the right things, tone from the top, put your systems, etc. in place. But sometimes I think it's important also to go and pinch people, saying, hey, you know what, missing this has far deeper repercussion in the organization that you should be aware about. So that's something which potentially worked for us. I'm just sharing that, maybe it could work for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nilesh. I think we are mindful of time. I think we have just completed the scheduled time, although we started late. So I think we are between lunch and yourselves. So I think it's a good time to close. So thank you. I think great insights, Kamini, Mukesh, and Nilesh. I think some useful takeaways, I would say, in terms of looking at your audience, pick what kind of solutions you want to do, not necessarily big bang approach. Look at how do you kind of start small and look to get new quick wins so that you're able to get more adoption. Wonderful, and thank you. Enjoyed being part of the conversation.